We have a term in sleep science called sleep debt, and this represents the mismatch between your actual sleep need and how much sleep that you've been getting, and specifically the circumstance where you haven't been meeting your standard biological sleep need. We've spoken about adenosine as the sleepiness chemical or sleep pressure. Sleep pressure is this natural chemical buildup of adenosine that's good and it's healthy, and it helps us time when we need to get to bed, and therefore it ensures if we have enough of that healthy sleepiness that we can fall asleep easily and then stay asleep. And this also has ramifications when we speak about sleep debt. Because every night, if we're not getting the sleep that we need, we're not giving our brain the ability to fully clear away all of that adenosine at night. And so we carry this gradual sort of developing inertia of sleepiness throughout the day, where day after day, we still have some of that adenosine lingering in our system. And it's like compounding interest on a loan. It just keeps accumulating. And that's why regularity is so critical. But the buildup of the sleep debt also has something else inherent in it, which is this idea that sleep is like the bank. But unfortunately, sleep is not like the bank. You can't accumulate a debt and then hope to pay it off at a later point during the weekend. If you miss out on sleep, and particularly critical stages or even entire night of sleep, what you lose during that night, you can't get back with recovery sleep. And furthermore, your body is just not capable of regaining all of the lost sleep that you had. Sleep is a biological necessity. And your brain and your body expect that sleep, and they expect it each and every night. One of the dangers that we've discovered with a lack of sleep is that you don't actually know you are underslept when you are underslept. So studies teach us that in people who are even just mildly sleep deprived by 1 hour or 2 hours every night for a couple of nights, if you ask them about how they're performing cognitively, they say, I'm performing just fine, I'm performing optimally, and I don't feel sleepy. But yet, when you look at their objective performance, it's already starting to degrade. So their subjective sense of how well they are doing is a miserable predictor of objectively how they're doing when they're not getting sufficient sleep. There's also an acute death risk when it comes to insufficient sleep, and that risk is drowsy driving. Because even when we start to shave off a little bit of sleep, maybe just 1 or 2 hours, we will often have what we call micro sleeps at the wheel, where you don't realize that you're falling asleep, but your eyes will partially close or fully close for just a second or two. Now, if you're driving at 65 miles an hour and you have one of these micro sleeps, it may be the last microsleep that you ever have. Several studies have taught us that a lack of sleep may actually be as bad as being intoxicated. In fact, these data have demonstrated that after being awake for about 22 hours straight, you are as cognitively impaired as someone who is legally drunk. That's the reason that when we start to drive without sufficient sleep, we may be as, if not more impaired than someone who is legally intoxicated. Naps can actually provide a variety of different benefits. It turns out that we've done a whole collection of studies with naps of different durations, naps as short as maybe 20 minutes or even 15 minutes, and naps as long as 90 minutes. And what we find is that these daytime naps do have significant enhancers for things such as our cardiovascular system. They can help, for example, lower your blood pressure. We also know that those naps can be beneficial for learning and memory. We've seen that naps, even as short as 17 minutes, can have some benefit to initiating the fixating of information that's just been learned before the nap. But we also know that naps are very helpful for just simply restoring our general level of alertness and focus. And I think people who experience naps can say, I am feeling pretty tired and sleepy as I get through to the afternoon. And all I need is just one of those short sort of 10-minute, 15-minute power naps. And then I'm good to go and I feel energized and restored. Those naps do seem to provide that type of restorative mental energy focus benefit. Naps, however, can be a double-edged sword. And this comes back to our conversation about sleep pressure. The issue with naps is that if you have a nap that's, for example, too long, or a nap that's too late in the afternoon, that nap will act like a pressure valve on that sleep pressure cooker. And when you take a nap, you will clear out some of that adenosine. You will remove some of that sleepiness. And so when it comes time for you to fall asleep at your normal bedtime in the evening, you don't feel sleepy anymore. Your sleep is going to be more shallow and you have a danger of waking up more easily throughout the night. But if you have a bad night of sleep, and this is something I do personally as well, I will resist the temptation both to wake up later in the morning, I'll still wake up at the same time, and I certainly will resist the urge to take a nap during the day. I'll just note that last night, it wasn't my night. I had a rough night of sleep. I'm going to have to manage my day a little bit more compassionately. I'm going to not nap. I'm going to build up all of that healthy sleepiness, and then I'm going to go to bed at my normal time. I'm not going to go to bed any earlier because I want to set myself up for success. So there are interesting strategies that scientists are now starting to explore that have real-world implications for circumstances where night shift or prolonged sleep restriction is just inevitable. It's necessary. Think of doctors and nurses, emergency service personnel, military, aviation. All of these are circumstances where people are necessarily going to have to undergo long periods of insufficient sleep. And so we're trying to find ways to use strategically naps to help overcome some of those effects, not reactively, but now proactively. So there was an interesting scientific study that was looking at airline pilots who are having to go through long-haul flights. And they found an interesting benefit for naps. Rather than naps being reactive to your sleep debt, they had a proactive nap at the start of the schedule or before the beginning of the schedule. It was what they called a prophylactic nap. And that prophylactic nap seemed to help them sustain then the continued wakefulness that they had to maintain throughout that duration of time. And so in those long-haul flight pilots, the way that they were able to measure the benefit of that proactive nap at the start rather than a later reactive nap was by looking at their brain's attentional performance, and specifically their ability to identify targets and respond to them quickly. And what they found was that throughout that long duration of sustained wakefulness during the flight, those pilots were able to hold up their mental performance better with the proactive nap, rather than trying to simply nap reactively later on. In terms of recommendations for you, if you are going to be napping, usually what I would say is try to make sure that you get that nap in before at least 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. in the afternoon. Any later, you're running the risk of disrupting your sleep. Second, in terms of the duration of your nap, I would try to limit it to a maximum of 15 or 20 minutes. That way, you're not going to go into those deeper stages of non-REM sleep. And the reason we want to be a little bit careful of that is because when you wake up out of that deep stage of sleep, let's say that you nap for 45 minutes, your brain is still going to have some of what we call that sleep inertia effect. Your brain is still going to be half in that world of deep sleep and half in the world of wakefulness. And that creates this sleep inertia where for the first hour or the first 90 minutes, you may actually feel even worse than you did before you took the nap. We've all heard of the term jet lag, and perhaps we've all experienced the phenomenon that is jet lag. Jet lag is a mismatch, and it's a mismatch between your internal biological time and the new time zone that you've just arrived in. How can we think about jet lag, and maybe how can we even strategically think about possible tools or tips that can help minimize the impact of jet lag? Well, the first thing that we need to realize is that when we arrive in the new time zone, we can't acclimate instantaneously. For every 1 day you're in a new time zone, you can probably get back 1 hour of reset time. So let's take an example. You're going to join me on a trip back home. Now, I live in California, and you're going to come back home with me to London in the United Kingdom. Now, London is 8 hours ahead of San Francisco. So when I arrive in London, it says midday on the clock in Heathrow Airport, but internally for me, I'm still 8 hours in the past. My body still thinks it's 4 a.m. in the morning. And that's why I and you, as my sort of companion on this trip, we're both going to feel pretty miserable. That's the initial impact of jet lag. We're right in the middle of our circadian trough. But what we're going to find is that we will have to stay in London for at least 8 days before we fully reset and acclimate to London time. It won't be for 8 days before we really start to feel as though we're in rhythm, we're in set, we're not tired during the day, we're not awake at night. Sadly, we don't have any cure for jet lag. Well, actually, we do have a cure for jet lag, which is don't travel, but that's not very helpful to you. But here are a collection of tips that can be helpful. The first tip is that as soon as you get on the plane, change all of your clock faces to the new time in the destination that you're traveling. So if we're taking a trip back to London, as soon as I get on the plane, I open up my phone, I change it to London time. I open up my laptop, I change it to London time. If I've got a watch on, I'll change that. And that way, I'm already starting to think on and operate on time in the destination. And that's going to help me then manage the rest of the trip. The next tip is try to sleep in the first half of a long-haul flight. Most people do it the opposite way round, which is very natural. Let's say that we're taking that trip back to London from San Francisco, and we get on the plane and it's 4 p.m. Well, most people probably aren't going to be trying to tuck themselves into bed until maybe the last 2 or 3 hours of the 11-hour flight, because naturally that's when their bedtime is. But if you can, try to wait till you have your meal, and that's fine. But then very quickly, try to see if you can put an eye mask on, stay away from all of those screens, pull down all of the blind shades, get the darkness, and see if you can help yourself get to sleep. This is the time where perhaps 45 minutes before you want to actually fall asleep on the plane, you can take some melatonin, maybe just 0.5 milligrams or 1 milligram of melatonin. And then try to sleep in the first half of the flight, then wake up and make sure, as a rule of thumb, you have at least 12 hours of sustained wakefulness from the point that you wake up from your sleep on the plane to the point that you expect or wish to go to sleep at night in that new time zone on the first night. You need at least 12 hours. Why? This comes back to sleep pressure. You need at least 12, 14, even 16 hours of healthy sleepiness to fall asleep and stay asleep. Now, of course, you're not going to get a full night of sleep on the plane, so that sleep deprivation will actually help with you falling asleep a little bit more naturally later that following evening in the new time zone. The next piece of advice is, on that flight, try and stay away from caffeine and also alcohol. Now, alcohol is served liberally and it's usually free on long-haul flights. And so many of us think, well, I've paid for the flight, I want my free alcohol. We've spoken about the impact of alcohol and caffeine on our sleep, But we also know that alcohol and caffeine can make it more difficult for your 24-hour clock in the brain to quickly reset each and every day. So try to avoid that. So now we've touched down in London, what are we going to do in the coming days? Well, here are a set of additional pieces of advice to try to treat that jet lag. Firstly, keeping it regular and waking up at a standard time. As you've woken up in the morning, it's really important to get that daylight. We need it in the morning, but it's especially impactful under conditions of jet lag. Get at least 20 to 30 minutes in the morning. Try to exercise or have some kind of physical activity. And again, do it in the morning. The earlier, the better. When you are out in the morning under conditions of jet lag, don't wear shades. Make sure that you take those shades off and you get the full impact of that daylight. Why? Because that daylight is going to be preventing or reducing the melatonin, which your suprachiasmatic nucleus will still be releasing because it's confused. And so you give yourself the best chance using daylight as a tool to strategically block that melatonin, which will make you feel more awake during the day. In the afternoon, go outside, try to protect your eyes from the sun because we already want to start to encourage the release of melatonin. And then at night, if you wish to, you can use melatonin strategically then too. Another tip is that when you've landed that subsequent day, or even in perhaps the second or the third day, if you really feel as though you must nap to be able to sustain some degree of mental capacity and fortitude, just make sure that you, one, get that nap as early as you can in the day, even a late morning nap if you feel like it, or an early morning nap. And also make sure it's a short duration of nap. Try to keep it somewhere between just 10 to 15, maybe 20 minutes, just taking the edge off. Because again, we want to set ourselves up for success at night. That's going to be our focus. So don't release too much of that healthy sleepiness that you will build up during the day.